Hello, can you hear me now? I think you should be able to listen to me now. Hello, okay, is that clear now? Finally, finally, finally. Thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you. Well, so, okay, should I start again? I should start again, finally. So, अच्छा बस हमारे पास okay, so let me start again. What I was discussing here, I discussed that you need to, in order to solve paper 5, you need to know that there are some basic mathematical equations that are always required, or mostly they are required. So most of the times you have these questions, like let me share my screen. So here we go. These are some basic mathematical principles that we always need to remember. Like when we start with the log functions, log a into b is equal to log a plus log b. Log a by b is equal to log a minus log b. Log a power b is b log a. So normally we use these equations, like these three equations, this one and this one and this one. When when the power is unknown, sometimes examiner gives you a question where the power is unknown. So that is q is equal to n power x and p power x. Now, when the power is unknown, log q, we take the log on both sides. So log q is equal to log np power x, and log q is equal to, you solve this one, that is log n plus log p power x. I know medicine वाले students के लिए problem होती है, but at least you should remember these three things. That is very important. So now this is log n, because this is the product, log n into p power x. So this is log n plus log p power x, and this is further, this is p power x, and there is a rule for this thing. So here is the rule for this part. So what we do, we write x and then log p. Now we rearrange this thing and we write it as log q is equal to x log p plus log n, and this equation appears as y is equal to mx plus c. So in your syllabus, either the graphs are like this, like I mean there is straight line passing through the origin. So here is log q, here is log p. In that case, there is no y-intercept, but that is the case when there is no n. So no n means ultimately it will lead to the idea that there is no y-intercept. So there are a couple of many equations that can be given. Oops, something happened. Something happened to my. Let me restart. Okay. Uh, hold on. So we may have different kinds of equations. Like we don't have the power. That is the first category of the equations. That is that n is equal to q power 1. Or the second kind of equation is we get n is equal to q power 2. Or we get this kind of equations. Like something q is equal to p p q by a by into something something. Let's make it fancy 1 by 3. Something like this. Now, whenever you get this kind of equations, use log functions, ln or log. So remember one thing, anti-log is e for natural log, and anti-log is 10, so 10 power 7. But when you deal with this kind of equation, that is simple. That is simple. You just need to make it y is equal to mx plus c. So it doesn't matter what kind of equation is given to you. Each equation must be getting the form of, sorry, not this one. Y is equal to mx plus c or y is equal to mx. That is the suggestive graph. So whenever any question is given, the very first thing is you must know that which one are dependent quantities and which one are independent quantities. That is most important part. What I mean is, okay. So when we start solving questions, we think about many different variables. So the very first part is before you start writing the script, the very first thing is you must know which are independent quantity. You need to identify independent quantity, and then you have to find out which one is a dependent quantity. Remember that independent quantity is always, look at my, what I should say. Let me take it again. Don't say that. So first thing is independent quantity. Second thing is dependent quantity. Independent quantity is always plotted on x-axis and dependent quantity is always plotted on y-axis. So आपको जब भी कोई equation हो, the very first thing that you should remember or should identify is कि इसमें से dependent कौन सी है और independent कौन सी है. In your syllabus, you have only two kinds of graphs, either like this or like this. This has the equation y is equal to mx. This has the equation y is equal to mx plus c. So that is the most important thing. Let me see if you have any question. Everybody's studying. Okay. So coming back to this part. So once you identify which is the dependent and which is the independent, so if any equation is given to you like q is equal to np square, and the question says that establish a relationship between q and p, then this is y equal to mx. then in this case your graph will be like this. There will be p square on x-axis, there will be q on y-axis, and the graph will be a straight line. But suppose if you have some equation like q is equal to np square plus k, then in that case that will be equal to mx plus c. So the graph will be most probably like this. Y-axis will be q and x-axis will be p square, and the graph will be straight line. These are some basic things that you should remember. We will start solving some questions, but let me tell you what are the major parts that we need to discuss, or we need to remember. I need to close it every time. This is technology. Okay, there is a question. How to determine it's dependent or independent? Okay, the question is how to determine whether it's dependent or independent. एक चीज याद रखें, जो जो क्वांटिटी आप चेंज करते हैं वो इंडिपेंडेंट होती है, और जो उसके रिजल्ट में चेंज होती है दैट इज डिपेंडेंट क्वांटिटी. दैट इज द बेसिक रूल. मैं क्वेश्चन अभी आपको दिखाता हूँ, उसके बाद विल डिस्कस अबाउट इट. सो आई एम टेलिंग यू विच आर द मेजर हेडिंग्स. ऐसा कोई हार्ड एंड फास्ट रूल नहीं है कि इन्हीं हेडिंग्स को ही आपने फॉलो करना है, बट दिस जस्ट कीप्स यू ऑन ट्रैक. The very first heading is always types of variables. Whenever you are provided with some question, you are given some question, you have to identify what are the types of the variables. The second heading will be the problem statement, or you can change it, like you can write number one as problem statement. Coming to problem statement is what we are going to do, and that is clearly labeled in the question. Like, let me show you this question. Here's a question. It says that it is suggested that the relationship between the flow rate Q of water through the narrow horizontal tube and the vertical height is Q is equal to this, blah, 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 blah. Where density is rho is the density of water, G is the acceleration of free fall, D is the internal diameter. Now, if you look at this part, design a laboratory experiment to test the relationship between Q and H. Value, determine a value for eta, like this, more than n thing is called eta. Here is the problem statement. Problem statement हमेशा question में given होगी. So if I want to write problem statement for this case, I will write like this. I'll write that the problem statement is to investigate the suggested relationship between oops, मेरा अपना रिव्यू चल रहा है. So relationship between, there were two quantities. The quantities were to find a relationship between Q and H. So I'll write between Q and H. And then what? Then the next part was, here was the next part. The next part was ये करने के बाद to figure out what is the relationship between them, hence find the value of eta. So this equation has two parts. Number one, to check whether the suggested relationship is true or not, and then to find the value of eta. So that is actually the problem statement that we are going to talk about and we are going to solve. But once you are done with this part, then you move on. So say, now the next third step will be The third step will be, so number three is, the third heading is procedure and measurements. So here you write stepwise. Step one, step two, step three, so on and so forth. We'll come to that part. The fourth heading is, मैं अभी सिर्फ आपको heading बता रहा हूँ कि कौन सी headings लेनी है. There is data analysis. Then number five is control of variables. And number six is safety precautions. So these are six things which are actually required by the examiner in the exam. And your marking scheme is always a bit weird. You know, in marking scheme, अगर आप 100% marking scheme को follow करना शुरू कर दें, there is no pattern given कि किस pattern के ऊपर लिखना है. You can write in paragraphs, you can write in the form of steps. It's your choice. It's ultimately your choice कि आप उसको किस form में लिखते हैं. But most importantly, you have to include all the points. मैंने एक दो papers देखे और उसके अंदर हुआ ये है कि if you see the marking schemes, let me show you a marking scheme. This is the famous, you know, extremepapers.com. So let me show you a marking scheme. People try to copy it 100%. I mean, you cannot copy it 100%. Marking scheme is never for the students. It is for the teachers. It is for the examiner who are going to check it. Look at this question number one, right? Defining the problem. You know, defining the problem is a major important part. अगर आपको ये नहीं पता कि आप करने क्या जा रहे हैं, then there is no point to design an experiment. So it is clearly mentioned that 1 mark is for defining what is independent variable and what is dependent variable. There is no such suggestion कि आपने किस order में लिखना है, but obviously it should be a logical thing. When you are going to solve paper 5, तो paper 5 is a script. ये जो question 1 है, ये एक ऐसा script है, एक ऐसी ऐसी hypothetical situation है. You are writing everything and you are going to give this script to the people, जो कि एक दफ़ा आपसे script ले जाए तो उसको वापस आके आपसे ये ना पूछना पड़े कि अब मैं क्या करूँ. Every single detail should be there. So you need to identify what is the problem, what are the dependent and independent variable. Method of data collection के अंदर आपको पूरी details mention करनी होगी कि data collection हम किस तरह करेंगे. We'll do it. Then analysis. मैंने second heading, if you look at this one, the first one is types of variables. So that is acknowledging what is marking scheme asking for. And then there is problem statement. We clearly mention that what we are going to do. Then the third part is procedure and measurements and data analysis. So coming back to this marking scheme, here is the method of analysis, which is called data analysis. And this is the procedure and measurements, like method of data collection. And then additional details. अच्छा यहाँ आके लोग बहुत अजीब अजीब हरकतें करते हैं. What people do, they write the complete script, and at the end they start writing, additional things. They suggest कि हमारे experiment में improvement कौन-कौन सी हो सकती है. Remember, when you are going to give your own script, make use your senses. आप अपने ही डिजाइन किए हुए experiment के अंदर improvement suggest नहीं कर सकते. Well, you are nobody to suggest कि आपका अपना experiment जो है उसको improve कर दो. The reason is कि या तो फिर उसके दो ही मतलब हैं, या तो आपने जानबूझ के कोई गलती पहले छोड़ी है और आखिर में आप जाके उसको improve करने लग गए. And that doesn't make sense. Your designed experiment will be improved by somebody else. So additional detail means, like, there are 100 methods to measure, acceleration. If somebody uses an inch tape and a high-speed camera to measure acceleration, fine, that is one method. But if somebody uses, a different method, an advanced method, I show you one example. Let me go to the. मैं आपके questions पे आता हूँ. Give me a little time. Okay, here we go. Here is, you know, here is a can. goes like this, and this is the water level. And you drop something from the top. It's going to move down, and you have to find out terminal velocity. To find terminal velocity, you put a rubber band here, you put another rubber band here, and then you measure this distance x, and you note the time using the stopwatch. Fine, you did something. This is one way to present your, solution. But if somebody does this thing, that here's the can, here's the water level, here is a light gate. You know light gate. हमने kinematics last year जब question करे तो उसमें light gate आया था. So you release object from here. When this object passes through this light gate one, the stopwatch is automatically switched on, and when it crosses this second light gate, it actually stops. So the distance between the light gates is known, and the time is electronically measured using the light gates. Now this method is much more, valid and good and better because there is a lot of technology introduced here compared to this one. So if this question, this arrangement or the designing is getting say 5 marks, then this one will be getting probably 10 marks because it will be including the additional details. So आप measurement उस method से भी कर सकते थे, but additional details को add करने का purpose ये है कि check ये करना है कि आपको और कितनी extra चीज़ों का पता है जो आप इस experiment में add कर सकते हैं. I hope that makes sense to you. Let's see if you have any questions. Should the headings be discussed in paragraph or could we merge them? Look, बासित क्वेश्चन आपका ये है कि उसको मर्ज करते हैं. मैंने कहा आपकी मर्जी है. There is no hard and fast rule. Believe me, there is no hard and fast rule, and there is no such thing given कि जी आपने उसको इस तरह लिखना है. But when I myself personally design an experiment, I remain very clear. I actually explicitly mention कि मैं इसको क्या करने जा रहा हूँ. So when I write, so here, like the very first thing when solving a question like this is whether do you know what is actually the problem. If you don't know what is the problem, आपको मार्क्स स्कीम के हिसाब से मार्क्स मिलने हैं. Where was the marking scheme? I lost it. Anyway. So आपको मार्क्स स्कीम के हिसाब से मार्क्स मिलने होते हैं. Here is the marking scheme. एग्जामिनर के लिए बहुत आसान हो जाएगा अगर आप हेडिंग्स दे देते हैं. अगर आप लिख देते हैं कि फाइन हियर इज अ प्रॉब्लम, यू हैव टू गेट दीज 3 marks, you have to get these 3 and 2 5 marks, you have to get these 2 marks, you have to get this 1 mark, and additional details अलग से लिखने की जरूरत नहीं है. additional details में look at this one, like reason method to keep current constant. अगर आपने ये बात अपने प्रोसीजर और मेजरमेंट्स में लिख दी है कि हम करंट कांस्टेंट रखेंगे और उसका रीजन भी दे दिया, और इसी तरह आपने यहाँ पे ये वाली चीज मेंशन कर दिया दैट V is proportional to voltage across Hall probe or Hall. I mean, you have to write this thing in your procedure and measurement. So if you make things easy for the examiner, you will be getting these marks. एग्जामिनर ने या मार्किंग स्कीम ने या कैम्ब्रिज ने कहीं नहीं लिखा कि आपने हेडिंग दे के लिखना है या आपने पैराग्राफ में लिखना है. It's up to you. Again, I'm saying it's up to you. But what I do personally, I do this thing. I write the problem statement. I write the type of variables, जैसे मैंने पहले mention किया. And then once I know about these two things, I have to draw a figure, a diagram, and the diagram certainly carries marks because while writing the procedure and measurements, in procedure and measurements, you have to give. So procedure and measurements जब आप लिख रहे होते हैं तो you have to refer to the diagram as well. Like suppose you are going to measure the variable magnetic flux density. For that we use Helmholtz coils. Helmholtz coils हमने पढ़े थे. This is a Helmholtz coil, a pair of solenoid, you know. So you make the diagrams and you use. Okay, so we use the Hall probe and everything, and we use some fancy gadgets. तो आपको डायग्राम मेंशन करनी जरूरी है, एंड डायग्राम शुड बी वेरी क्लियर एंड शुड बी लेबल्ड clearly labeled. And that takes time. That takes time to make good diagrams, and obviously with practice you come to that. I think that's about my answer. So there was a question. Okay. Sir, so like would it be better to use a second light gate वाला step? Obviously, अगर अगर आपको लाइट गेट वाला मेथड पता है तो अली आगा आप वही लिखेंगे ना, ये तो नहीं करेंगे कि मैंने पहले रबर बैंड यूज़ किया था लेकिन अब मुझे लगा है जब मैंने अपना प्रैक्टिकल ख़त्म कर लिया, एट द एंड ऑफ द प्रैक्टिकल मुझे लगता है कि हम लाइट गेट यूज़ कर लें तो बेहतर होगा। इट विल बी टोटली इनसेन कि अगर आपको पता था कि लाइट गेट यूज़ कर लें तो वो बेहतर होगा, तो फिर आपको पहले लगा लेना चाहिए था, रबर बैंड बीच में देने की क्या ज़रूरत है। दैट्स व्हाट आई एम सेइंग, दैट इज़ द बिगेस्ट मिस्टेक दैट पीपल डू। पहले अपना एक्सपेरिमेंट लिखते हैं, फिर अपनी एक्सपेरिमेंट के अंदर इम्प्रूवमेंट सजेस्ट कर देते हैं। सो थिंक लॉजिकली एंड थिंक ऑब्वियसली यूज योर सेंसेस कि आप अपनी लिखी हुई चीज़ के अंदर अगर इम्प्रूवमेंट सजेस्ट कर रहे हैं जो कि उसी टाइम में या तो 4 दिन के बाद आप सजेस्ट करें तो इट मेक सेंस कि जी आपको 4 दिन के बाद एक नई चीज़ का पता चला, आप पहले रबर बैंड से करके फारिग हुए, उसके बाद अचानक आपको पता चला कि यू कुड डू इट विद द लाइट किट्स, फाइन, इट मेक सेंस, बट विद इन सेम 30 minutes you wrote about the rubber band, and at the end of that 30th minute, I mean in the last 2 minutes, you wrote that okay fine, it was a very good experiment, I suggest this, but I think if you use light gate, that will be totally insane. So don't do that. If you know that light gate will be good, go for it. Don't write rubber band, or don't give a rough sort of method. It's very important. Can I give you the answer? So let's solve a question. Let me take some questions from extreme papers. Extremely good. I don't know this. I think 2010. So here is the question. Let's solve this question. It says that a current in a flat circular coil produces a magnetic field. So read this question carefully. It says that a student suggests that the strength of the magnetic field is related to the distance from the center of the coil. And see figure, and some equation is given. Now, if you look at this equation here, this equation has unknown powers, where V naught is the strength of the magnetic field x equal to 0 and P is the constant. Okay, we don't know what is constant actually, what is the name of this constant. But most importantly, a rough diagram is given that here is a coil, and if you move away from the coil, then the magnetic flux density will decrease. Now, obviously, you know that what is independent and what is independent what is dependent. So that means when you move away, the distance is working. आप जो change कर रहे हैं वो distance है. So distance is actually independent variable, due to which the magnetic flux density is decreasing. So magnetic flux density decreasing means magnetic flux density itself is dependent on the distance. Now, the very first thing which when I do this such kind of questions, I look at the equation, और इक्वेशन देखते ही मुझे पता चल जाता है कि मुझे लॉग फंक्शंस यूज करने पड़ेंगे या नहीं करने पड़ेंगे। और दूसरी चीज मुझे क्वेश्चन का स्क्रिप्ट और से देखने में पता चल जाएगा कि which one is independent and which one is dependent. Now, if you move to this part, design a laboratory experiment. This one I like it. Laboratory experiment that uses a Hall probe, because the device you mentioned earlier, to investigate the relationship between B and X. Now you have to find out the relationship between B and X. That means B is dependent and X is independent. So before I start writing the script, I'll do some rough work. And here is the rough work for me. I'll show you. Don't see it. Oof, there are so many videos. Okay, so my rough work will be that first I look at the equation. Here's the equation. B is equal to B naught. Let me write this equation here. B is equal to B naught e power minus P, and then there is X. So the equation should take the form of, y is equal to mx plus c, because the power involved होती है, इसका मतलब है inevitably it will go to get the shape of y is equal to mx plus c. So let's solve this equation. Let's convert it to that form. Suppose I write log b is equal to log b naught plus log e power minus p x. In next step, I'll write log b is equal to log b naught, and log and anti-log I cancel. This is minus p, and then there is x. Now in this form, if we go back to this question, the question says that establish the relationship between b and x. So b is dependent, x is independent. Let me rewrite it like this: minus px plus log b naught, and here is log b. So this is y is equal to mx plus c form, like log b is plotted on y-axis, must be plotted on y-axis, x must be plotted on x-axis, log b naught will be the y-intercept, and minus p is the gradient. So what I imagine about this situation, that eventually when this experiment will be really performed and finally we'll be having the data, there will be log b on y-axis, there will be x on x-axis, and the graph will be somehow like this. How do I know that it is starting from the maximum value and going to zero? Because there is a negative sign. And there is a negative, whenever there is a negative sign, that means the gradient will be negative. So m will be, the gradient will be actually minus p. In fact, now because there is already gradient introduced, so it will be the value of p. So minus and minus was cancelable. So once we know this thing, that this should be the form, then when we will write problem statement, the problem statement will be to investigate relationship between b and x. So let's get it confirmed कि क्या वाकई ये था. Let's design a laboratory experiment. If you look at this highlighted part, that uses a Hall probe to investigate the relationship between b and x, and that's it. So आपको कोई unknown quantity find नहीं करनी. You just need to establish this relationship. You just need to see whether this relationship is valid or not. And in fact, इसका ये मतलब नहीं है कि आप experiment perform करना शुरू कर देंगे. You have to suggest a way how to verify that this relationship is valid. Once you are done with this part, you will write types of variables. The second step. So the types of variables will be, चाहे तो इसी heading के अंदर लिखें, it doesn't matter. The first one should be clearly mentioned. Independent variable. An independent variable is x. And second is dependent variable. So the dependent variable is b. So you are done with this part and this part, and now if you refer to the mark scheme will have certain points. Let me show you a marking scheme of this question paper. Mark scheme के बजाय तो anyway. So this was paper 51, I guess. So let's shift it. Yeah. So look at this marking scheme. X is independent variable, B is dependent variable, or vary blah blah blah. So once you have clearly mentioned, you got 1 mark for this. Then there is a procedure. Keep number of turns of coil constant. The control of variables. A control of variable इसी के साथ merge हुए हुए होते हैं. But we know what we are going to do. The purpose is, you know, here is the problem statement and here the type of variable. This collectively is going to give you 1 mark. And then we move to the next part. Let me see if you have any questions. No, there is no question. Okay, so we move to the next part. Now, once we are done with this problem statement and the type of variable, no, okay. Now, the next step is you need to sketch diagram. You need to make a diagram, and diagram should be clearly labeled. It should be having all the parts clearly mentioned. Okay. So let me draw the diagram. Here we go. There is a coil. If you look at the paper, so here is a question. There is a coil. The coil has the distance has to be measured from the center of the coil. So जब आप डायग्राम ड्रॉ कर रहे होंगे, you have to clearly mention कि आप coil को support कैसे करेंगे. So what I think of coil like this, like 3D. So here is a coil. When you are having a coil like this, you attach it with the positive and negative. So complete circuit diagram must be given. Now, how would you support it? That support is also important. So here is a retort stand with a clamp and the boss. Here is another retort stand with a clamp and the boss. And this line, I lost the color there too. Okay, here's the pencil. Okay, so this is the center. This is the center of the coil. To measure magnetic flux density, we use Hall probe. So if I draw a Hall probe here, the next important thing will be, this is the Hall probe and the Hall probe unit. Here is the voltmeter and here is the measuring thing. So you clearly mention it, that what is that. The next part will be, you need to measure the distance between Hall probe and the center of the coil. And for that, you have to mention how you are going to measure it. I mean, don't put a question sign on the diagram. That is just for you. So suppose you use a bench. So everything is placed on a bench, something like this. You know. So on this bench, you have placed everything on this bench. And then you place a meter rule. But clearly mention that this is a wooden bench. So there is no electrical conductivity. Wooden bench. Right. So there is a meter rule here, and the meter rule is going to measure the distance between this Hall probe and the center of the coil. And these are the retort stands with the clamp and the boss. And here is the calibrated Hall probe unit. Whenever you are going to use Hall probe, you have to mention what is the kind of the Hall probe. I mean, you have to write calibrated Hall probe. Otherwise, पूरी calibration आपको लिखनी पड़ेगी, आपको mention करनी पड़ेगी. Be very careful about it. So diagrams should be neat, should be clear, should be labeled, and should make sense. Sensible होनी चाहिए. हवा में कोई भी coil नहीं खड़ा हो सकता. You have to use the retort stand, clamps and boss and everything that is required. So making diagram is again, retort stands, not retort stand. I'm sorry. It's a retort. If I make correction. Okay. So I'm talking about retort stand and the clamp and the boss. Yeah. I don't have any other question. But thank you for correction. So if you don't have a neat and clean diagram, there is no marks mentioned regarding a diagram. But diagram के बगैर आप कुछ भी mention नहीं कर सकते. I mean, think in this way that if you give somebody a script and there is no diagram, then nobody will be able to understand what is actually going on. So in today's session, what we discussed actually, we discussed that. Let me highlight all the points. We discussed that number one, the major mathematical equations that we are going to use, like the log functions and all. Secondly, we just plan out what should be the layout or the work plan. Work plan for question number one. What are the headings and how the headings should be written? You need to write the problem statement. That is most important part. And then in problem statement, you have to write the types of variables. And the next question is, how do you know that what are the variables there? You have to find out, you have to look at equation, and you have to say what are actually equations, and then you have to see this statement design. जहाँ पे क्वेश्चन में डिजाइन और उसके बाद की चीज लिखी होगी, you have to read that, because there is the point where you find the types of variables. Once you are done with this part, the third one is the diagram. And diagram should be clear, it should be labeled, and it should be neat and should be sensible. So please don't take this part for granted. This part actually helps you out a lot. So, and then again I repeat, you must know the basic equations like log functions, log a plus log b, log a into b is actually log a plus log b. You must know that log a by b is equal to log a minus log b, or log a power b is equal to b log a, and so on and so forth. You must know all this stuff. So that is most important thing that we studied this thing. So I'll try to keep another session, and in that session we'll continue with the same problem. And in next part, what we are going to do, we will be discussing that what are the next procedures, what are the next important parts. Like we have to go for procedure and measurements. We will discuss the data analysis, the control of variables, the safety precautions, and obviously all the types which we have to discuss according to the level of the person. These sessions will continue. And the first thing that we discussed today is introduction to this paper 5. What are the major important parts? I will continue with the session, with these sessions till the final exams. And apart from paper 5, I will be discussing paper 4 as well. Paper 4 के भी हम problems discuss करेंगे. And I think I will be able to solve paper 4 questions here as well. So thank you very much for joining, and I look forward to the next session. And that will be announced on the group, and we will be discussing that part again. Communicate हो जाएगा, invitations आ जाएंगे. जिन्होंने अभी तक अपना email enter नहीं किया था, please enter your emails, and Yeah, that is easy for me. Otherwise, it will be very difficult to go for it. Secondly, this whole today's session is recorded on YouTube channel. You can watch this video later as well. So thank you very much for your time. I see you tomorrow in the class. Take care.